So welcome everybody to the March edition of our Real World Parenting Conversations. So I'm Pam Evans. I head up the Director of Marketing and Development for FSGC. And we are absolutely thrilled that you're with us this evening. As you may know, Family Service and Guidance Center, we specialize in treating kids of all ages who are struggling with mental health issues. Anything from anxiety to depression to ADHD, we treat the whole gamut. Kids of all ages from the wee ones, preschool age, up to 18. And I might mention we are the only community mental health center that specializes in treating kids in the state. So, we're very proud to focus all of our efforts on helping, healing, and giving hope to kids in the Topeka and Northeast Kansas community. We understand that parenting is so much harder even than a year ago. Tonight is for you. We hope you come with lots of questions. We have had some great questions that Sarah's going to answer. If things pop up, feel free to use the chat. Put in a question in there. And please note that we are recording, albeit it's a little different than normal. So if you don't want your picture, don't show video, or if you don't want your name, you can always change your name on your Zoom settings. If you need a certificate of attendance this evening, please also use that chat box to just type in your first and last name, and I'll make sure that those get sent out to you. So with no further ado, I want to turn this over to Miss Sarah Bubna, who is one of our amazing school-based case managers for tonight's topic. And I'm going to let her introduce herself and the topic, and take it away, Sarah.
Thanks, Pam. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. And then Pam, correct me if I'm wrong. I just wanted to make everybody aware this is recorded and put on the website later.
Yes, and I will, when you're done, I'll give everybody that link as well.
Well, I just wanted to put that out there. Yeah, first off,
yes.
In case any friends or family that couldn't make it tonight, but you feel like anything we talk about would be helpful. And then if there's any other questions like that, I just want to say this now before I forget, that we don't answer or that you want to know more about, please feel free to reach out to us. We're not going to be able to cover everything tonight, but I'm going to do my best to at least answer the questions that were asked and just talk about things that come up a lot with the elementary kids that I work with. So give me 1 second. I'm going to see if I can get a little PowerPoint going here. Is that working, Pam?
Nope.
Can you see the PowerPoint on there? Can you see the PowerPoint? No? Didn't work? Okay. I'll work on that. But let's get started. Like Pam said, my name is Sarah, and I've worked at Family Service and Guidance Center for 3 years. My job is a case manager. And so if you haven't had case management or your child hasn't, what I do is if a child or teenager comes here for therapy, and then, maybe the parent and the therapist feel like they need extra support, then I come in, or any of my team members to offer that. And so we work with kids who maybe are struggling in a school setting, home setting, or community setting, and we just try to work on their therapeutic goals in real time, like whatever is really gonna be helpful for them. So I go into schools a lot. I work with a range of ages, elementary through high school, and actually right now, interestingly, I primarily work with high school, but I love elementary age, and what I feel like I hear a lot from high school kids is actually things that happened during their younger years, during elementary age, and how those things have affected them, positively and negatively with where they are now. And so I feel like hopefully we're just going to help set a framework tonight for things that you can help that will impact now in elementary, but, even through high school. And I'm sure all of us can think back, to things in our life where we are today and things that happened when we were young. And maybe they were handled well or maybe not handled well, and how that impacted us. So as I'm sure all of you know, as parents, grandparents, and caregivers of elementary age children, it is not an easy time. These are they're really hard years, but I think that they are really important. So as we kind of go through, some of the questions fit really nicely into what I was going to talk about, but I'm going to speak for 15 or 20 minutes on some thoughts that I had, and then we'll do the question part. So we'll get to your question, I promise. And the goal for tonight is really just for you to feel supported in your role as a parent, grandparent, or caregiver, and hopefully just some new ways to encourage the child or children in your life that you love. So when we think about what our purpose is as a parent or caregiver, obviously the main goal, keep them alive and well, fed and sheltered and housed and off to school. Those are the main goals. But I really think a big part of our job too is helping kids learn how to emotionally regulate, because we're not born knowing how to do that. Someone has to help us work through how we handle things when we're mad, when we're sad, how to express those feelings in a positive way. And again, that's a big job because little people can have very big feelings, as we know. The size of the person does not diminish sometimes the emotional response. And when I was kind of preparing for this, I was looking through just some research that's out there. And one thing I really thought summed it up well was just saying that, they've done, a lot of research about therapy and mental health things, and that they kind of identified two fundamental qualities that determine, how well a caregiver is able to, what they call effective care, but, to support a child. And one is sensitivity, and the other is responsiveness to the child. And so I don't know, I thought those were just a good way to frame it, that really the goal is to be as sensitive as we can to what the needs are, and then also respond. It's kind of difficult, we all can think of people in our lives that are sensitive to our needs, but then they don't really follow up and change it, or people that are like, well, what can we do? And they're very responsive, but maybe they don't help us with those feelings. And so trying to find a good balance, of those two. I really also want to say, and it's very important, that, I think mom guilt is real, or parent guilt, grandparent guilt. We take a lot on. And when, the kids in our life are struggling, I think a lot of times feel very responsible for that. And obviously there's things we can do to help them and to encourage them. But I just wanted to share that there's a lot of things that happen in life that we have no control over. Loss and death and grief and a kid having to move schools, things that are a big impact, but they're not anyone's fault. They're just part of life. I was even just going to share personally, when I was 5 years old, my maternal grandmother died. My mom was diagnosed with cancer. She had 3 little kids. All of us were in elementary. Then she recurred with cancer the next year and did chemo and radiation. My paternal grandmother came and helped to take care of us. And then she had a degenerative illness. She was in a car accident with us. She got worse in her health, and then we moved out of state. And so within 3 to 4 years, for me, I was, ages 5 to 9, there was a lot of things that happened. And as an adult and working, through my own things in therapy, I realized my parents had not an ounce of control over any of those things happening in life. It wasn't anything that was their fault. It was just sometimes how life goes. And so I just say that to remind you that I'm sure everyone here is doing, the absolute best that they can. And there's going to be things that are going to be out of our control. What we can do is try to find ways, to support the kids in our life. And obviously this year has been, really wild with the pandemic, how that's affected things. And so that's something none of us control, but we know that it impacts the kids in our lives. So I think, the first sort of thing that was talking through it. I really think that kids respond well to us being able to talk through their feelings and things like that with them. I know that's not, some of us aren't very good at talking about feelings, or it feels awkward for us. And so that's really important, but I also think listening, that piece. One thing I hear a lot from kids is my parents don't listen. Our older kids are just they're always lecturing me. They're never listening. And we're probably not great at listening as adults. And so finding ways to do that. One thing I was thinking about is kind of, different kids I've worked with in different scenarios. And, this kid's like, I hate Mrs. Wilson. She's the worst kindergarten teacher I've ever had. Like, she's the only kindergarten teacher he's ever had. So instead of saying, like, oh, don't say you hate Miss Wilson and she's doing her best, because she probably is. And no, we don't want a kid to say they hate somebody. But stepping back and say, well, what makes you say that? What happened? Did something happen in school today? Well, she made me cut with scissors, and I hate cutting with scissors. I'm not good at it. Okay, so you felt kind of frustrated, and you felt like she was being mean because she was trying to teach you to do something. Well, yeah. Okay, so just talking through it there and listening gets us to a different perspective. So you really don't hate her, you're just kind of frustrated. Well, yeah, I guess so. Okay, well, sometimes we have to do things that frustrate us, and those things are really hard. What about if at home we work on cutting with scissors? Because I know it's frustrating for you and you like to do things really well. And I bet in class, if you talk to Miss Wilson, she would help you. Oh, okay, yeah. So we can kind of take something, I think, sometimes, and just listening well and talking it through, we can kind of reframe it. And then I think when a kid is calm, we can address the social issues. You know what? I'm really glad you felt comfortable to come home and tell me you were frustrated with Miss Wilson. But I think at school, if you're upset with her, maybe just talk with her. Maybe don't tell your classmates, I hate her, and address the other things. But sometimes we go to that first with kids. Well, don't say you hate them, and don't. Instead of really kind of trying to listen and talk through what the feelings are that they're having. They still might dislike their teacher. There's great teachers out there, and there's some that aren't so great. But just trying to sometimes get to the root of the issue. I know it takes more time and energy, and we all are limited on those things. But I think it helps kids be able to think through what they're actually feeling. And I think as much as we can affirm, like, thank you for telling me, I'm really glad you felt okay to tell me that, is helpful. I think another thing to work on as adults, and we're not great, is apologizing. Kids already know we don't know everything, and that we mess up. I think they're pretty aware of that. And so I think sometimes we think, well, that's going to undermine my credibility. But I think it actually helps kids be able to accept responsibility for when they're wrong. And it's a good model just to say, like, I didn't do everything right. Like, I shouldn't have yelled. I was kind of impatient with you today, and I'm going to, try to do better with that. One thing we know, like I said, little kids have big feelings. And sometimes they really do need help with kind of learning how to regulate and calm themselves down. One thing I found is really helpful with elementary kids, and this is just an example. You can take it how you want. But with some of the elementary kids I have that struggle a lot with anxiety and anger in school, and then maybe kind of act out, is we put together what's called a calm box. And I'm on a budget over here, so this is nothing that hopefully you can't afford. All stuff from the Dollar Tree. So we took a pencil box, and I made this for an elementary age kid to keep in their desk. We talked with their teacher about having all school appropriate things, nothing that could harm anybody. This kid wasn't aggressive towards other kids, just she would get overwhelmed. But in the top of the box, like right here, we put some glue and some Mod Podge, and we just put pictures of things that she liked, using her 5 senses, her eyes, to engage. Like, these are things that make you happy. You could do a little note, from mom or grandma that you tape in there that the kid could look at, or a picture if they're not great at reading yet, depending on their age. We had little squishies from Dollar Tree, something for them to kind of, that way they're not disturbing the whole class, maybe by having a tantrum or throwing themselves on the ground, but they can kind of sit quietly and still listen, but get out some of their aggression. I put headphones in there. One kid really got sensory overloaded, and so we made a deal. When her teacher wasn't teaching, when she wasn't instructing, she could pop the headphones in just to help kind of cancel out the noise in class. Or, for some kids, they can hook it up to their Chromebook and listen to some music, something that might calm them down. We put some little mints I got at Dollar Tree, some little gum, things that were, appropriate again for school, that they could kind of use their taste buds, kind of, if they like mint or gum. We put some smelling markers. Excellent. And then also some, like a little peppermint thing. Again, all this stuff was from Dollar Tree. It's a little peppermint scented roller. And I want to encourage kids to make these at home too. So that might be an activity, as a parent or a caregiver, that you can do with the child to say, when we get upset, it's okay to feel upset, but we want to find ways that are going to help us calm down, that aren't going to disrupt other people, because other people are trying to learn and trying to work and do things. And it also helps kids feel empowered. So even at a young age, we want to model behavior that we want from kids and responses, but we also want them to feel like, even if I'm not right there next to you, you're able to go get, this item that's really helpful for you and learn to calm yourself down. So I just wanted, that was one option that's pretty low cost. And I've done it with several of the kids I work with, and we just had a good time talking through things that they think might help them. They also have Silly Putty and Play-Doh and things like that at Dollar Tree, if the kid doesn't like the squishy. So just one idea I wanted to put out there. Also wanted to touch on with elementary age, there's a lot of development. If you think about a kindergartner to a fifth grader, like in those, 5 or 6 years, like huge changes for them. And kind of what we know, just from research, I'm not a researcher by any means, but I just read some stuff sometimes, is that kids use play as language. So when they're really young, early elementary, they don't always have the language to say how they're feeling. I had a kid that I worked with, and he would tell me, like, I'm mad, I want to die. So we addressed, maybe his feelings of, like, I thought, well, he could feel suicidal. He could really feel like that. But really, a lot of times what he was feeling was, like, disappointment, anger, and I had to teach him those words and teach him what that felt like. But I noticed when kids play certain ways, a lot of times they kind of show what they're feeling, or they use play or like imagination as a way to explore their feelings. They're not always able to like verbalize that. So just a reminder, because sometimes kids are annoying. They want us to play with stuff for hours, and we're like, oh my goodness. But just that's their primary way, of communicating before they get all the language. And then also, when you think about elementary, most kids throughout part of elementary, or a lot of it, still believe in Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny and the Tooth Fairy. So just a reminder that developmentally what's happening for kids is they're still figuring out what's fantasy and what's reality. And we have a good grasp on it, and sometimes I think we forget. I'll talk with kids and I'm like, I have terrible nightmares, I never sleep. Oh, did you see the new Chucky movie? And I'm like, what? You're 6, why are you watching that? Because even though a kid can tell you, well, that's not real, I know that's not real, developmentally they don't always have the capacity to separate fantasy from reality. And I think that's true sometimes with video games and things like that. So just a reminder that they can't always process things the way that we do. And so sometimes they need us to tell them, like, we're not going to do that, because I just don't think that maybe, like, you're ready for that yet. And I know it's hard, because kids will get mad and then they'll throw a fit about what we tell them no to. But I think, setting those limits until they're developmentally ready, giving them a context for those things. And I think I was also thinking developmentally, it's just been a tough year, with remote school and back and forth, and the pandemic, and kids I've noticed with kids that I've known for a couple of years, sometimes going a little bit backward with their social skills, things they learned developmentally almost seem like they're going backward. So if that's happening for a child or children in your life, don't panic. I really think that we can come back from this. But I know it feels like a lot. We want the best for the kids in our lives, the kids that we love. But I just don't want you to feel like if that's happening, that you're like, you're the only parent or caregiver it's happening to. I think for a lot of kids, we've kind of just had to really hone in on those skills, but it's been tough because they haven't had the socialization at school or seeing their cousins or, their baseball team, things that they normally have that help. And it's also common just developmentally for kids to be on different levels. Maybe like academically they're doing really well, but they're really struggling with peers. And that's pretty normal throughout elementary for them to try to kind of balance those things out as they go. And so the last sort of point I want to talk about, I think before we get to the questions here, was just things are awkward for us as adults to talk about. We don't want to talk about sex, I don't think very much, and we don't really always like talking about, like I mentioned earlier, like suicide and things that just, for us, they're heavy things, and we think like, oh, they're elementary. But I would just like to say, talking with kids about sex in an appropriate way, for their development is crucial. Because by the time they get to middle school, if they're in public school or they have friends, they've heard a lot of things. They don't always know what it means. But I think if we as adults can overcome like our feelings of awkwardness, to just talk with them, to start good conversations, we have a lot, more success later with helping guide them in those things. And I think also in this job, I learned I had never thought about a 5, 6, or 7-year-old talking about wanting to die or hurting themselves. I just thought like, that's not even possible. But I just want to, also say that it is, But I don't want you to feel overwhelmed by that. Like, we're here to help. There are things, that we can do to help with that. But to take that seriously, even though that, again, that's a really tough conversation to have. Because we want kids to learn things from us, not from, friends at school or, accessing things on the internet, even accidentally. There's a lot of things that are kid-friendly that end up not being. And the other day I read in an article that the average age of kid views pornography for the first time is 10 or 11. So that's elementary school, and that's the average age. And again, it's a lot of times kids stumbling onto things. But I think even setting a framework, I talked with a fifth grader last year. His mom's like, I don't know what he's watching upstairs. And I was like, well, I don't watch TV downstairs, number one, if you can. But also I just said to him, I said, sometimes there's things that pop up and we're not even looking for them. But once we see it, we can't unsee it. And you want a kid to view those things in the context that they have. And so I do feel strongly about technology. Kids love it. They love YouTube. They love video games. But I really think to set limits on that and to set pretty firm limits is helpful for kids, because they'll be on it all day. They'll just binge it, all day long if we let them. But just to remind them that we want other, it's not great for their development, their neural development. They may not care about that, but we do. And that we want, them to be creative, that for them to be outside. Those things are important, because I see a lot of kids that just, all they talk with me about is video games. I'm like, do you do other stuff? And so that's just, I think, also important. But those were kind of the main points. I don't want to cut into our time for questions. Pam, am I on track? That way? Okay. Because, guys, I could talk about this all night, but you don't want to be here all night. So, those are just a few of the kind of the things I wanted to hit on. The last point, I guess, I'll address this in the questions. I'll just do that. Yeah. We'll just get to the questions. So these were sent in by you, and plus a few other people I think that didn't make it, but that had signed up. So I'll just kind of read the question and then just talk about my answer to this. And I want to say, I do this for my job. I love kids, love working with them, love finding ways to help them, but I am not the only person out there. And so take this, hopefully you learn from it, but I would run it by other people that you trust, this lady Sarah said this seems like a good idea, but run it by, the school social worker, your child's teacher, get their feedback. I think we get afraid sometimes that we're going to be judged, or like, our kid's the only one going through it. I don't want the people to feel like there's something wrong with my kid. But these are people who work all the time. I mean, your kid's teacher is constantly around kids of this age. More than anybody can easily see what's kind of like developmentally normal, what's appropriate. School social workers, the same thing. So just, I'd put the information out there to them as well. Get a second opinion here. And also, if you have insurance and you have a primary care physician, I would always talk with your doctor about a lot of stuff too. Again, they see a lot of kids. They have some great advice as well. So one of the first questions, and there's actually two I kind of put together, was just how to raise your child to be inclusive with other kids and how to prevent them from becoming a bully. I think is a great question. And then the other one that I felt like went along with just talking about their child was going to be coming up to be a kindergartner and wanting to know how to make sure that, she's a good human being, that she's motivated to do well in school, and wanting her to be confident and self-aware. So I felt like, those things kind of went well together there. And I think, in working with a lot of kids, I've worked with kids who have been bullied, unfortunately, and kids who are bullies, unfortunately. And I think a kid who's confident and feels good about themselves really usually doesn't have a lot of space to bully other kids. And so I think, as we think about being a caregiver, how can I support this child or children in my life? How can I help them feel confident and self-aware? And I think as much as we can, it's easy to focus on the performance stuff. Like, you got an A in school. Awesome. You're so good in school. You're so good in sports. And those are great things to encourage kids with. But I think we also want to focus on character qualities, not just that they got an A. Because then when they don't get an A, do they feel like, am I still worthy? Am I still loved? Kids go really extreme with these things. It's like, I got it, B, my mom's not going to love me. I'm like, whoa, what are you talking about? But that's how it feels to them in the moment. And so really just trying to bring up qualities. You are so helpful. You are so caring to other people. and really give, those compliments. And I think sometimes we hesitate, like if I overdo it, they're going to have this huge ego. But I've met very few kids, of all the kids that I've worked with, that really have huge egos. Most kids, I think, are just looking for more confidence and more, just feeling like the adults around them really like them and appreciate them for who they are. And so I think that is maybe one way to just help ensure that your child's not out there hopefully bullying other kids. But I think, again, that point about, being inclusive is helpful as well. And luckily we live in an era there's a lot of good resources, like Sesame Street as a kid's show is awesome. They really try to talk about like ableism, like what does that look like versus someone who's disabled. I saw a commercial recently that was like, my friend's autistic. It was, Sesame Street commercial. And like, we try to just help them like have headphones so the loud noises don't bother them, and just things that were not around when I was a kid, for sure. And so it's great, I think, to know that those resources are out there. And I think as parents, there's great books at the library that just, talk about different kids' backgrounds and experiences. And so exposing kids to that, I think, really helps build empathy and inclusivity, and also what we do, like what we model, what we say. So if we're out there like, well, these so-and-sos are just total jerks, kids in the back seat hear that and, remember that. Or if we're kind of, limited in our social groups, we only hang out with just our friends from church. That's not bad, but who else is out there that's different from us, maybe, that can just show our kid a different perspective on life, I think that's just important to think about as adults. So all that to say, I don't think you can overdo it sometimes with just the building the self-confidence. Of course, I can't get the PowerPoint to work, but I had it's fine. I have a list of great qualities that you can affirm your kids with. So maybe we can get that to you later if you email Pam or something. Another parent asked about the transition, from 3rd to 4th grade. It can be really tough for students. And I know sometimes, 4th to 5th, that is also a question. And how do we help prepare kids for more demanding homework and time management? And I think the first thing I would say about that is not using things as a threat. We hear that, I just feel like I hear that a lot. If you don't do it now, next year there's going to be more, and you're just going to have to do it. And then kids are just already overwhelmed, and then they're more overwhelmed. There's going to be more next year. But again, trying to use a lot of praise and reinforcement. You do a really great job at school. Your teacher told me you're always, focused. But then when you come home, it seems like it's a little tougher. So what do you think? And again, kids don't always know what they need, but I think we should include them in the conversation, even to a 3rd grader. What do you think would help you at home focus? What's different at home than at school for you to focus so that you can do your homework? And Dad and I don't always have to be after you to get off the video game or to do this or that. And that's where I think sometimes setting limits is helpful too, with kids finding out, what maybe at home is tough, or the distractions, and some of those are real life. You put the kids, play the video game for 30 minutes. I got to make dinner. We've got to do that. Nothing wrong with that at all. But, just saying, then the expectation is once dinner is over, you're going to help clear the table, and then we're going to get right to homework. We're going to do 30 minutes of homework, and then we're going to do something else. I think as much as we can set expectations and talk about them, kids are still going to push against them, obviously. You probably all know that. But I think it does help kids know what the expectations are. I notice they really struggle when they're not sure. And even high school kids. I don't know. It's my mom said one thing and then something else happened.
Bye-bye, Jim.
So if a high schooler can't figure it out,
Bye.
They might really have some trouble with that. So yeah, just a reminder, I think, to be positive about that, and then also talk with teachers and social workers, and hey, what do you recommend? What normally is helpful for 3rd graders? What can I do to support that? Because again, I think most teachers want to help, and if your kid has a teacher that's not that helpful, I guarantee there's other teachers out there that that you can crowdsource that and get some info. Maybe your cousin's cousin teaches 4th grade, and they know some stuff too. This kind of goes along with that, but there was another question about how helping kids balance academics and social skills. They kind of mentioned that their son loves sports and wants to participate in activities, but he struggles in school, and so there's homework, and they kind of want to prioritize that, rightfully so, over extracurricular activities in the evenings. And then they were kind of saying in the summer, it seems like a lot of sports take place during the day, and both parents work, and it's just really tough. And so this is a little bit of a bias that I have. I think that organized sports are awesome for kids, or organized clubs. You know, I did 4-H growing up, and, you know, scouts. And I think all of those things are absolutely wonderful kids to, you know, to build responsibility, to build social skills. But I think when it comes down to it, you know, it's not necessarily going to be harmful to your child if they cannot get on the baseball team this summer. You have to do what's going to work for your family. And I think talking it through with them, you know what, bud, I'm so sorry. I know you really wanted to do baseball this summer, but just with, you know, mom and I's schedule, it's going to be really hard to make that work on the team that you wanted to be on, that your friends are all on. So we're hoping that next year, when you want to do bitty basketball, that's on Saturdays, we can do that. That's kind of our plan. But for the summer, we would like to do some other stuff that helps you, you know, feel like part of a team. And so it's so hard because you're so tired when you get home. And the last thing you want to do after a day of work is like take the kids to the park. But what if you could plan a Thursday night? Some of the I know it's hard during COVID. People have different restrictions and all that. So taking all that into consideration, let's call some cousins to come over on Thursday night at the park right down the street. We're going to go there like 6 o'clock on Thursdays. Everybody knows that. And the neighbor kids can come, and we'll just do baseball. As many kids can come, you know, on Thursday nights, and that's free. And that's a way to have your kid feel encouraged still in something that they're interested in, but that also works for you. Because the reality is, as parents, is like, it is tough. It's tough to do it all. And you have to work, and you don't want to deny your kids anything. But I think what I've also found with, again, really talking with high school kids is like something will happen 3 times in their childhood, and they will cling on to that like it was the best years of their life. My dad used to wake me up early. I'm the oldest in my family when I was a kid, and take me every couple Saturdays out for pancakes. He probably did it like less than 10 times, and 35 years later, I'm still talking about it. I think those things are very meaningful to kids. So we feel so much guilt. Like, I couldn't get him on the baseball team, and he's never going to make it into college now, and, you know, not going to be a professional baseball player. But I think making an effort to do things that include your kids' interests and carving out time for that is very meaningful to kids. And another question somebody asked, which I think is awesome, is what are some of the best low or no cost activities to do with the kid that are beneficial? And so what I would say is the most beneficial, because I do this in my job, is to set a time every week. And that's very hard with schedules. My entire job is setting a time each week with different kids. And when, you know, kids are ready to be done with the services that I offer, what I hear the most from parents is like, they really looked forward every Thursday at 4. They knew you were coming. We don't get a lot of, you know, financial resources in this job. So I'm not taking them out to like, you know, Dairy Queen or Starbucks every week, even though I would love to. Sometimes we just go get a $1 drink at the McDonald's drive-thru. And when it's not sweltering in the summertime, you know, or after school, we drive around in my car. And I have a little loop around Topeka that I take kids and we just talk. Or we go to a certain park, you know, or we go on a hike. And I know, you know, some of those things might be a little difficult with mobility, what your mobility is, what your kids are. But I think if you can regularly schedule it and make it a little extra special. I mean, McDonald's has cones for $1.49. I know we're all on a budget. I had a kid I would take every week, and when she graduated out of services, her mom said, I started taking her to McDonald's on Thursdays to get a cone, because that was something you guys did together, and I know that was meaningful to her. And that doesn't cost a lot. You know, it's just that they know that they can predict that. And it might be you pick up your middle schooler at 2:45, and you pick up your elementary kid at 3:30, but you've got the other kid for 45 minutes in the car. You know, go through and pick the longest McDonald's drive-through line, because you've got more time to talk. I mean, kids don't know this. This is my trick. I'm like, which one around town's the longest, or which one's the farthest away? I know gas is expensive right now, but just so that we have time to talk about their day and ask about things. I think that's meaningful to kids. But if kids are able and they're out active, what I do the most is probably the Governor's Mansion trails when it's not muddy and cold. In Dornwood Park, there's some baseball fields, and they have some trails behind there. McDonald's, spent a lot of time in the McDonald's drive-thru, getting some cookies. It's hard right now with COVID. There's not a lot of places that are open. I used to take kids to McDonald's, and we would just play cards. You know, they cost $1 for a pack of cards, and I let the kids teach me games that I have no interest in. I hate Uno, and I play it 5 hours a week for my job. But it's meaningful to kids to be able to choose the activity and to decide on that. So hopefully that answers that questions. If you need a long list of free, again, email, and I'll send those to you. But just try to make it regularly scheduled. I think as much as you can is great. And then we had a couple questions about supporting a kid who's new to the school this year, and it's like a really tough time to make friends. Sometimes he says he doesn't have any friends. And in that case, I would say, I guess I would reach out to the teacher first and find out. Not that your kid's lying. If they feel like they don't have friends, that's, their feeling. But to find out if there's something that the teachers observed. Maybe you have an unusually shy kid, and when I was a kid, I was really comfortable at home. Obviously, I'm great talking now, no problems. But I wouldn't talk to anybody at school. I was just really shy. So reach out to the teacher and just see if the teacher is maybe noticing some dynamics. That maybe they could offer some insight. Well, yeah, Bobby seems to want to join the other kids, but he is pretty shy. And so just then you can kind of hone in on maybe something more specific. Maybe he just needs to know how to interact with kids. And it's tough. Kids have very specific interests, and there might, in a class of what was normally 25 or 30 kids and now is maybe 10 or 15 in elementary, in the micro classrooms, there might not be other kids that like Pokemon. And they might not have, they've been separating classes. So normally all the fifth graders would go to recess and they could swap Pokemon cards, but they can't now. They're keeping the classes, trying to keep them separate. So some of it might just, it's a new school, is hard anyway, but maybe just tough finding kids, that have the same interests, friends. And so I would say, if you feel like your kid has no friends, in the neighborhood, or they have cousins their same age and they don't interact well and they don't have friends at school, there might be something bigger going on there for them. But if if you notice they're social with their cousins and they're social with the neighbor kids and school's a little bit tougher, I think I would just try to encourage the relationships that they do have and to try to use those. You get along with, Alex is the same age as you, and I know he's your cousin, but you guys are friends too. And what do you guys talk about, or what do you do? But transitioning to a new school is really tough, and especially during remote learning and COVID. But I would ask the teacher and maybe the school social worker if they have ideas. I had a kid that started a new school last year in 4th grade, and that's tough, and social is not his strength. And the school, I would go visit him in school, and we would have lunch together. And it was interesting because kids that he normally wouldn't talk to, all of a sudden they're like, oh, there's adults here, because they still think adults are kind of cool in elementary. So then they wanted to talk with me, and then I would just lead a conference. Well, will you tell me about what Pokemon do like, and stuff I don't even know about, but just pretending. And that kind of helped engage the kids. So then I would, leave, and then they're still talking to each other. And his school social worker was great, and she helped. She was like, oh, you can come for lunch, but you got to bring a buddy. So he had to interact with the kid in the class. And then some of them became friends. So I think, hopefully there's some resources at school. Again, your student might be doing some remote learning. So that might not be helpful in that regard, but just some ideas. And then there was another question about if the kid says they don't want to go to school, but you can't really find a specific reason. I would again check in with the teacher and just see if there's something going on that maybe they feel embarrassed about, or they feel like they're not doing something well. Because kids can get pretty, I think, embarrassed about things that as adults we're like, oh my gosh, pish posh, that's no big deal. But for them it can feel pretty intense sometimes. So it might be something like that. I've got several kids that, behaviors at school were really intense, and come to find out they don't know how to read at the grade level. And at the academics is a struggle for them. But they acted out in a way so that the light wasn't shining on the fact that they couldn't read and the classmates are going to make fun of them. They caused a ruckus and, left the classroom before that happened. And so sometimes kids are actually pretty in tune with sometimes I think what they're feeling and is happening, but they don't always know how to put that into words for us. So I would definitely talk with the teacher first, or school social worker, even, sometimes the receptionist in the office. There's a couple schools I go to and they know more than anybody else about the dynamics, or, just asking the teacher, like, hey, the para, did they notice something during recess? I can't, figure out what's going on. I would start there. I know it's tough because you want to help your kid and you're like, oh, you're not giving me any info here. And then I would just keep, in a kind way, asking them about it. Hey, last week I know we talked about this and you didn't come up with anything, but I just wanted to, kind of check in again. Is there anything at school that's going on that I could help with, or anything that's really bothering you? and not that you want to like go around your kids' back. I would, talk with them first, but then maybe ask like their friend's mom, who also goes to the school a lot, to, I don't know, just get some info on what's going on there. And there was 2 more questions that I wanted to address. One was about helping a 5-year-old sleep in their own bed. So I crowdsourced for this because I'm like, oh, that's not my specialty. And got some info from some people that work here about that, who have kids that age and have been through some issues, because some kids, it's not an issue at all. They'll be fine in their bed forever. So just talking to the doctor, pediatrician, about that was one thing that I heard that was really helpful, just because some kids have some like low iron levels. I'm not a doctor, but that can affect sleep. Sometimes they just need a little more physical activity. It's been a tough year. Kids have been in the house a lot, and sometimes it just makes sleep kind of tough for them. And I know that there's events, like we were talking about, events that happen that are out of our control, but sometimes can be a little bit traumatic for kids. And I think sometimes at nighttime, those things can really, come to light, or they're not saying that, but maybe they're having some nightmares, and it feels better to be in mom and dad or grandma's bed or grandpa's or auntie's than in their own bed. I think doing, and this is true for not just bedtime, but having a routine is very helpful. Kids, like, they say they don't like routine, but they do very well with them. And so getting that started early, not just like, okay, brush your teeth and get your pajamas on and get in bed now. Some nights it's like that. But if you can get a head start on that, okay, I'm going to put a timer on, and in 5 minutes, you can watch 5 more minutes of TV. When the timer goes off, I need you to go brush your teeth. And then we're going to read a book. And then we're going to, whatever routine works for you. But sometimes that can be pretty helpful, just to wind kids down. I had a kid I used to work with, and he, this was not at family service because I was nannying him, but you're probably like, why would you be putting this kid to bed? But I put him to bed, and he was a tough kiddo. And what did really well for him, his parents was like a sound machine, because he'd go to sleep pretty easily. He was a pretty active kid, and he'd be tired. Then any noise would wake him up, and then he'd be in his parents' bed. So they just found, I think, like an old phone. But Walmart has sound machines, and I let him pick. He was 5. He was pretty young. He was like, I want the rain. Great. And that just helped soothe him. We would read some books. There was like a all-night light. He didn't know how to read yet, but he could keep some books in bed with him. And I think it just gave him a sense of control over sort of his sleep and his routine. And that seemed to be really helpful for him. And I think, I see a chat here, bedtime yoga. Yes. I think that's really good for kids too. It's just to engage, the physical part of it. And I think you put in the chat, there's so many great options now with YouTube and apps. My mom was showing me an app just the other day that, you don't want the kid having like a phone, 6-year-old having the phone in bed all night, but it was a kind of a calm down sleep app that, like, we're going to do this and, read this story. And they said it was working pretty well for a kid that had a lot of anxiety about sleep. And then just, I think, incentivizing the positive versus the negative. Like, you didn't sleep in your bed last night. You know what? You slept in your bed 2 nights this week. We're going to put a little sticker on a chart over here. I'm so proud of you. Can we make a goal to try 3, next week? We all do better, I think, when we hear positive stuff. So as much as we can remember that. And then the last question that I had was just about how to help a kid that tells you that they want to die. Or, like I said, sometimes kids don't exactly say it that way. I mean, that definitely happens. And I've had kids say just like, I wish I would just go to sleep and not wake up. Or I don't want to be here anymore. And just trying to calm our own bodies down. Because that's very triggering to hear a kid that we love that's in elementary school say that. You're like, wait, what do you, instead of saying like, don't say that, or what are you even talking about? I think kids react to our reaction and they're like, well, nothing. To calm ourselves down and take a deep breath and say, okay, you told me you didn't want to be here. Do you mean you don't want to be in the car right now? Did you not want to be at school? I just picked you up from school. Or do you mean you don't want to be here, like living anymore? Because sometimes kids say things and they're like, oh, no, I didn't mean that. Okay, just checking. But I think realizing, like I said, it's tough to realize that kids in elementary school can have those thoughts and feelings, that it's not the most common thing, but a kid that young can feel depression, can have thoughts of not wanting to live anymore, wanting to harm themselves. I think it's tough because developmentally we know that kids, they might not want to be here anymore. They might feel like they want to die, but they don't also understand what that means, that that's forever. It doesn't mean they're not having the feeling, but we understand, what that means. I had a kid one time that was like, I'm just going to go sit in the road and I don't care if a car hits me. He was really little. And I thought, like, he knows that that's bad and that's going to harm him and that's how he's feeling, but he's not thinking about, like, if he dies, he's gone forever. And that was hard to hear. Again, I would have to be like, let me take some deep breaths. I'm like, okay, why would, what's making you say that, or what's going on? And I think really trying to find out if there's something else that's upsetting them. Again, kids can feel a lot of shame and have all sorts of thoughts and feelings about a friend that doesn't want to be their friend anymore, or an embarrassment that happened at school. And so is this something where they just said it one time and it was directly after an embarrassing incident, or is this something that we're hearing more and more frequently? So I don't want you to feel overwhelmed by that, even though it's an overwhelming thing. I just want you to know we're here. So if your child isn't, or grandchild, or whoever isn't in therapy yet, we do have therapy services. Sometimes it's, I think, really helpful to talk, and they can do family therapy, talk through it with the child as well as you. What are helpful things? We have a crisis option. Then, so when you call the family service main number, you can call 24/7, 365. If it's after hours, it will direct you directly to our crisis line. But if you have to call during the day, you can say, I just need to talk to crisis. And we have a building that's set aside just for kids who, maybe your 7-year-old tells you, like, I want to die. And you're not sure that, what that means, how intense that is. You can call and just talk to the crisis clinician. They don't even have to stay in our crisis center, but we do have that. We've had kids that, just say, like, I don't think I can be safe. I think I might hurt myself. And the parent might say, like, I don't know if I can keep them safe. Well, we have dedicated staff that they can stay for one night. They can stay for 3 nights. And there's other options around Topeka. I just, am familiar with ours. But I would also, if you don't think, if you talk with the kid and they just say, like, I just don't want to be here anymore. I'm not going to hurt myself right now. I would, again, talk with, if they're in public school or even, private school, I would talk with a school social worker. I've had a lot of good luck with just some social workers being able to kind of help support on the other end, work with the parents too. And then, we have our services, but really kind of wrap around them in a lot of ways. But I would take it seriously, as hard as it is to hear. I would try to, find out what's going on for them. And if you feel like they won't be open with you, and that's not a criticism if they won't on you or your parenting. I think sometimes kids just feel embarrassed, or like, I love my parents and my grandma and I don't want them to be worried, but this is how I'm really feeling. Which is sometimes why, a case manager, a therapist, or school social worker is just an outside person that sometimes can get in there. So hopefully that is helpful. I think, let me just double check, guys. I don't want to leave anybody hanging. I think that was all the questions that I was asked ahead of time. I really wanted to make sure I got to everybody's questions. They're really good questions, I have to say. I mean, kind of work to get those to get those answers. But hopefully that's helpful. I know we've covered like a wide gamut of things. But I was going to say also there are some really good books. I put one in the chat. I didn't even mean to. I was like, I'll put it at the end. Which is about talking with like elementary age. It's that one specifically for boys, about sex and about their body changing. Because again, those are awkward conversations. I know that. But the book was like really helpful, and that same author did one for girls too. But those were just available on Amazon. But I use the library too, because sometimes I don't want to pay $15 for a book. And the Topeka Library is awesome. So it's okay to get a book and just read through the book with your kid. It doesn't mean, and I know we feel awkward, but I think kids don't even notice sometimes that we feel awkward. They're just like, okay, well, that's great. So push through. It'll be great. I think that's all I've got there, Pam. I don't know.
So, okay. Well, I know we've presented a lot of information this evening, but if you have any other questions, follow-up questions, feel free, go ahead and put those in the chat box. And Judy, thank you for letting me know that you need a certificate. We'll be sure to get one sent out to you. If anyone else on the call needs a certificate of attendance, I just need first and last name in the chat box. We'll be sure to get that to you. If you know of anybody who wanted to sit in on tonight's presentation but couldn't make it, let them know that the recording is available, or will be, tomorrow on the website after I figure out how to get it off my phone. And you can go to our main website, which is fsgctopeka.com. And on the right-hand side, there's a blue button, and it says Parent Resources. Simply click on that button, and you'll be able to watch that recording and all of the other prior recordings. So there are a ton of great, there's just so much great information that has been presented in the past. Please use that as a resource, because that's what it's there for. You know, we feel very blessed here at Family Service and Guidance Center to be here for our families in the community, for our kids. And one last thing, and I did not get this pulled up on the screen, but if you know or you have had any negative effects, whether it be needing more resources for food pantries or rental assistance, those types of things, we do have a program at FSGC. If you go to our website, again, at fsgctopeka.com, and then put a /stronger, it's STRONGER. There's some information there that we just ask you to fill out, and we'll have one of our staff members call you and try to get you connected to whatever resources you might need and might be helpful. This is just a part of a grant that we were lucky enough to get. So please share that as well. So let's see. Any other questions? Man, they're letting you off easy, Sarah.
Thanks, guys.
I will. We'll send the PowerPoint to everyone who was on the call so that you can see the great quotes and the information. There's a couple of really great graphics. We will send that to you after. We'll send that probably tomorrow.
It's only like 6 slides, guys. Don't worry.
Yeah.
It's crazy, but just a few things, like Pam said, I found helpful with some supportive words and just some ways, and then Mr. Rogers' quotes, because he had some good things. So
yeah. So
no homework on.
Yeah, right. No homework. So I guess in closing, I just wanted to thank each and every one of you for taking your time out, just to add more tools to your toolbox. We know parenting is crazy hard right now. And it's not always easy to make the time and to make it a priority. So kudos to all of you for doing that. It will mean a lot down the road. Even if you got just one little snippet, hopefully you got more than that, because Sarah, you did a great job as always. But just important for us to kind of learn from each other. So again, thank you so much for joining us this evening, and hope you picked up some new tips and information.
Yeah, thank you guys. I appreciate you coming. So thank you, Pam.
Hey, you bet. Thank you.
Have a good night.
All right.